What if the silence you've been struggling to understand was never the end of the connection, but the beginning of something within you that you were never meant to ignore? If you're hearing these words right now, pause for a moment and notice something simple but powerful. This might not be random. Not every message shows up in your life at a meaningless time. Sometimes it arrives exactly when something inside you has been quietly searching for understanding, even if you never said it out loud. There's a part of you that has been wondering, waiting, trying to make sense of what you feel but cannot fully explain. And somehow, the person you keep thinking about, the one who appears in your quiet moments, the one whose absence feels heavier than their presence ever did, seems tied to this moment more than you realized. Stay here with this, because what you're about to understand may completely shift how you see their distance. It might challenge the painful narrative your mind has been replaying when everything gets quiet at night. The story that tells you you weren't enough. The story that suggests they moved on easily. The story that makes silence feel like rejection. That story may not be the truth at all. Silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it carries emotion that is too complex to speak. Sometimes it holds confusion, inner conflict, unprocessed feelings, and words that someone doesn't yet know how to express. When emotions become too intense or too overwhelming, people don't always move closer. They pull back. They go quiet. From the outside, it looks like absence, but internally, it can feel like everything is happening at once. Before you decide this chapter is over, consider this more carefully. What looks like an ending from a distance may not be an ending inside the heart. The silence you've been carrying might not be as simple as your hurt has made it seem. It is easy to interpret this as rejection, easy to assume you were forgotten, easy to believe their quiet means you mattered less than you hoped. But what if the distance wasn't created by a lack of feeling, but by too much feeling all at once? What if what they experienced became overwhelming instead of absent? For many people, strong emotions don't translate into communication, they translate into withdrawal. Not because they don't care, but because caring brings up things they haven't fully dealt with. Old fears, emotional wounds, patterns of self-protection they fall back into without even realizing it. When something touches those deeper layers, even something meaningful can feel intense or destabilizing. So instead of explaining, they retreat. Instead of expressing, they go quiet. And while that may feel cold on the surface, internally it can be a kind of emotional overload rather than emotional absence. This is why silence can be so misleading. It doesn't always mean feelings disappeared. Sometimes it means the feelings became too tangled, too heavy, too difficult to organize into words. And when someone can't make sense of what they feel, stepping back becomes their way of regaining control. What you may have interpreted as emptiness could actually be internal conflict. One part of them might recognize something real and meaningful in you, while another part becomes afraid of what that connection awakens. That push and pull creates tension inside them, wanting closeness on one side, resisting it on the other. You may have stirred something in them that doesn't fit neatly into how they usually handle emotions. Being around you might have brought forward feelings they normally keep buried: vulnerability, longing, fear, even unresolved parts of themselves they don't often face. And when someone isn't prepared for that kind of emotional exposure, their instinct is often to step back, not lean in. That reaction doesn't define your value, it reflects what your presence activated within them. And when someone withdraws from something they cannot yet process, the impact doesn't disappear. It lingers. It shows up later in unexpected ways, through memories that surface without warning, through moments of quiet reflection, through small reminders that seem random but feel personal. This is also why it can feel like the connection isn't fully gone, because real emotional impressions don't vanish just because someone stops responding. They continue underneath the surface, in places no one else can see. There may still be moments when you enter their thoughts without intention. Early mornings when everything is still, late nights when distractions fade, small pauses during ordinary routines when something in them briefly returns to you. They might think of reaching out and then stop themselves. They might form words they never send. Outwardly, life continues as normal, but internally, not everything is resolved. This is what makes silence so confusing. It hides everything while revealing nothing. On the outside, nothing seems to be happening. On the inside, something may still be unfolding. And what you meant to them may not feel replaceable in the way your mind fears. New conversations may feel less layered. New moments may not carry the same emotional depth. Not because life has lost meaning, but because certain connections leave an imprint that doesn't get overwritten easily. If you've felt sudden emotional waves or unexpected reminders connected to this person, it doesn't mean anything supernatural is happening. It means your mind pays attention to what feels unfinished. The brain amplifies uncertainty. Emotion strengthens memory. The heart keeps returning to what it hasn't fully understood yet. And here's what matters most. This is not only about them. It is also about the human need for closure. When something meaningful remains unresolved, it doesn't stay still. It quietly shapes both sides over time, even when nothing is being said. What feels like distance may also be a process neither of you can fully see yet. They might start questioning their own reactions, replaying the way they responded, and wondering why this connection affected them so deeply in the first place. They may think about why they couldn't stay present, why they pulled away, and whether stepping back actually protected them or ended up costing them something meaningful. And the truth is, this kind of reflection is rarely neat or organized. It doesn't arrive in one clear realization. It comes in waves. Some days they may feel certain they made the right decision. Other days, the silence feels heavier, and what was left unsaid starts to echo louder than expected. Real understanding doesn't form instantly. It builds quietly in the background while life continues forward. That's why any visible change later on can seem sudden. By the time someone reaches out, if they ever do, the emotional process has usually already been unfolding for a long time beneath the surface. But here's where your attention needs to turn. Because while something may be shifting within them, something is also shifting within you. Waiting has a way of exposing your internal world. It reveals how much of your energy gets tied to expectation. It shows how quickly the mind creates stories when it doesn't have answers. It brings forward everything: hope, fear, attachment, uncertainty, the need to understand what something means and where it is going. None of that makes you fragile. It simply shows you're human. But if you stay in that space too long, your life slowly begins to orbit around a possibility instead of your actual present. And this is where the shift begins. Not by shutting your feelings down, not by pretending something didn't matter, but by refusing to let unanswered emotions become the center of your entire emotional world. As time passes, something subtle starts to happen. Your attention begins to return to yourself. Not in a sudden transformation, but gradually, almost quietly. You start noticing your own routines again, your own thoughts, your own direction. The parts of you that weren't connected to waiting begin to reappear. You remember that your life has always been bigger than one connection, even one that meant a lot. This doesn't erase what you felt. It doesn't require you to deny it. It simply means you stop losing yourself inside it. You stop living inside the silence of someone else's absence. You start reclaiming the parts of you that got absorbed into waiting, analyzing, hoping, and wondering. And that shift changes your emotional state. Because when longing no longer consumes you, clarity has space to form. The feeling may still exist, but it no longer controls you. You hold it instead of being carried by it. You become more aware of it, more steady within it, more grounded around it. That changes everything about how you move forward. It means that if contact ever does come, it will meet a different version of you. Not someone overwhelmed by uncertainty, but someone more centered, more self-aware, and more anchored in their own value. This is where real emotional maturity begins. Not when you finally get answers, but when you learn how to live fully without them. Not when silence ends, but when silence no longer defines your worth. That inner shift is not small. It quietly transforms how you see them, how you see yourself, and how you respond to whatever happens next. And if a message ever does break that silence, it likely won't arrive in the clean, composed way people imagine during moments of loneliness. It won't be perfectly structured or emotionally polished. It may come suddenly, in an ordinary moment, and shift everything without warning. A message, a call, a return that you didn't predict. And what gives it weight won't just be the words themselves, it will be everything behind them. Everything delayed, everything avoided, everything that stayed unspoken for too long, finally finding its way out. When emotions are held back for extended periods, they rarely emerge neatly. They come out uneven, fragmented, sometimes hesitant. Not because the feeling is unclear, but because it's too large to fit cleanly into language. There may be pauses, unfinished thoughts, unexpected honesty, even awkwardness, not because the emotion is weak, but because it's overwhelming. And in those moments, you may need to listen beyond the surface, beyond the phrasing, beyond the imperfection of how it's said. Because sincerity doesn't always sound smooth. Sometimes truth comes out unpolished, simply because it's real. If that moment ever arrives, it wouldn't just be communication. It would be evidence that something inside them finally shifted enough to break the silence. But even then, nothing is automatically simple. Because real emotion doesn't erase fear, and missing someone doesn't instantly create readiness. A person can care deeply and still not know how to rebuild what was uncertain or unresolved. They can feel the connection and still struggle with timing, trust, vulnerability, or the weight of their own past. So if reconnection ever happens, it won't only depend on what they feel. It will depend on what has changed in both of you during the silence. Because time changes people. Reflection changes people. Pain and growth both reshape who we are in quiet, undeniable ways. The person who steps away is never the same person who eventually looks back. And neither are you. That's why every return carries something deeper than just reconnection. It carries a decision. Not only whether two people come back into each other's lives, but what that connection would even look like now. Could what once existed return in a healthier, more balanced form? Have emotional needs become clearer with time, or are they still misaligned in the same way they once were? Are both people more honest now, more self-aware, more emotionally steady? Or is the bond something that belongs more to memory than to the present? These aren't small questions, and they matter more than imagination or hope. Because longing has a way of turning familiarity into something that feels like destiny, even when reality is far more complex. So if that door ever opens again, it cannot be approached through blind hope alone. It has to be met with honesty, self-respect, and the willingness to see things as they are, not just as they are wished to be. But there's something even more important beneath all of this. While it's natural to focus on whether someone returns, the deeper story has always been about who you become in the meantime, when nothing is certain and no answers are available. That's where real transformation happens. In the waiting, in the silence, in the ordinary days where life continues, even though something inside you feels unfinished. You still wake up. You still move through your responsibilities. You still carry yourself forward. And in that process, something either begins to weaken you or strengthen you. Slowly, if you allow it, it strengthens you. You start to realize that your emotional balance cannot remain in someone else's hands. Your worth cannot keep rising and falling based on someone's presence or absence. Your life cannot stay paused around a silence you didn't create and cannot control. And this realization doesn't make you cold, it makes you steady. It teaches you how to feel deeply without losing yourself in what you feel. How to care without disappearing into someone else's absence. How to love without making uncertainty your home. And once that lesson starts settling in, something subtle begins to shift. You stop waiting in the same way. You begin to live again, not because all your questions are answered, but because you are no longer defined by the lack of answers. That's where freedom quietly begins. From that place, everything looks different. Any future interaction becomes clearer. You can sense what is genuine and what is not. You can feel the difference between real growth and temporary emotion. You can recognize whether someone is returning with awareness or just reacting to loneliness or regret. That kind of clarity protects you without closing your heart. And the intensity you once felt begins to soften, not because the connection meant less, but because you are no longer smaller than your own waiting. This is what healing often looks like. It doesn't always erase feeling, it changes your relationship with it. You can remember without collapsing into it. You can wonder without chasing. You can carry the weight of what mattered without making it the center of your entire existence. And when that happens, even your perception of them changes. They stop being the center of an unfinished story and become one meaningful chapter in a life that is still unfolding. This matters more than most people realize, because emotional intensity is often mistaken for emotional truth. But intensity alone doesn't tell you what is right for you. Sometimes it only shows where your deepest fears, needs, and attachments were activated. What you do with that awareness is what shapes everything going forward. You can use it to understand your patterns more clearly. Your need for certainty, your fear of being forgotten, your tendency to give too much meaning to what remains unresolved. And that awareness doesn't weaken the connection. It brings you back into yourself inside it. It allows you to hold the memory without losing your grip on your own life. And this is the part that often gets overlooked. The most important answer may not be whether they return. It may be who you become by the time you no longer need their return to feel complete. Still, life does sometimes circle back. People do return. Silence does break. And when it does, it rarely arrives gently or neatly. It may come with honesty that feels unprepared, words that don't land perfectly, emotions that spill out unevenly because they were held in for too long. And in that moment, what matters most is not just what is said, but what has changed. Has silence created awareness, responsibility, and growth? Or has it only created distance filled with longing? Because real growth leaves signs, not just emotion, but accountability. Not just missing, but understanding. Not just returning, but changing. If all they bring is emotion without clarity, longing without accountability, then the same old pattern is still alive underneath everything. But if what they bring feels different, calmer, more grounded, more honest, more aware, then you will recognize that too. And even then, the decision will still belong to you. Not to the version of you that once feared losing them or feared being replaced, but to the version of you that has learned how to stand without needing uncertainty to hold you up. That version understands something essential. A return is not meaningful simply because it happens. It only holds value if it arrives with truth, not confusion. And if it offers something healthier than what silence left behind. So let this settle in a simple way. Their silence may have carried more emotion than you ever saw. Their distance may have come from internal conflict rather than indifference. Their quiet may have been filled with thoughts they couldn't organize, feelings they couldn't express, and memories they didn't know how to handle. That is possible, even very possible. But your peace cannot depend on that possibility. Your peace has to come from something deeper than waiting for someone else to eventually explain what they themselves couldn't understand. It begins when you stop measuring your worth through what remains unspoken. It begins when your energy returns back to your own life, your own direction, your own growth, your own stability. It begins when you accept that what is meant for you will find its way in its own time, and what does not return cannot erase who you are. And from that place, fear starts to lose its control. Hope becomes lighter, less consuming, less desperate, and life begins to open again, into new experiences, new clarity, new strength, and possibly even new forms of love that align more fully with who you are becoming. Because your story was never meant to end inside someone else's silence. It keeps moving, it keeps shaping you, it keeps teaching you how to remain open without losing yourself in what is uncertain. Whether a message comes tomorrow, months from now, or never at all, one truth remains unchanged. What you felt was real, and what it taught you matters even more than what it left unanswered. And even now, if there is still weight inside you from what feels unfinished, that is understandable. The mind naturally tries to turn uncertainty into certainty. It wants conclusions. It wants definitions. It wants to know whether silence means loss, delay, regret, fear, or something unspoken in between. But not every chapter reveals itself on demand. Some things only become clear after time, distance, and growth allow both people to see without fear or confusion getting in the way. And often, the more we force clarity, the further peace seems to move away. Real understanding tends to arrive in softer conditions, when pressure is gone, when chasing stops, when overthinking loosens its grip, and when life is allowed to flow again. In that space, truth becomes easier to recognize for what it is. If something is meant to form, it will take shape on its own. If something is ending, that truth will also reveal itself naturally. Either way, your responsibility stays the same. Remain rooted in yourself. Keep your heart open, but keep your center intact. Let memory stay as memory without becoming a place you live in. Let longing teach you without letting it control you. Let silence reveal what it has to reveal without turning it into a definition of your worth. And if one day their words do reach you, hear them with clarity instead of hunger, with steadiness instead of desperation, with a sense of self that is no longer waiting to be completed. Because that is the real shift, not whether they speak, but whether you can remain whole regardless of what they say or don't say. So for now, breathe. Let the silence exist without turning it into proof that you were forgotten. Let the questions exist without letting them take over your entire inner world. Let the connection remain meaningful, but not consuming. Keep moving. Keep rebuilding. Keep returning your energy to the parts of you that still need you. Because the deeper lesson here was never only about them realizing your value. It was about you realizing it so fully that no silence could ever take it away. And once that settles inside you, everything changes. Waiting changes, memory changes, even love begins to change. It becomes less about being chosen and more about living in truth. Less about chasing a return and more about honoring what your heart has learned. If they return, you will meet that moment differently. If they don't, you will still have become someone stronger, clearer, and more alive than before. That is not a small outcome. That is transformation that lasts. So don't fear this season just because it is unclear. Some of the most important shifts happen quietly, in the unanswered spaces. And one day, you may realize that what once felt like waiting was also quietly rebuilding you. Not only the connection, but yourself. And in the end, that may be what mattered most. And in the end, you realize the silence was never where your story stopped. It was where you slowly began to find your way back to yourself.